Ladies and gentlemen, this video is on solving quadratics using factoring. Okay, so we're going to actually solve two different types of quadratic equations, as you'll find out. Okay, so let's take a look at this first one right here. First of all, we usually solve quadratics using the quadratic formula, but sometimes it's nice and actually easier and quicker if we solve it by factoring. Okay, so if we look at this problem here, for instance, we notice over here it's not equal to 0. Now whenever you solve a quadratic, for the most part, you got to make sure it equals 0. So what's the first thing we're going to do? Is we're just going to go ahead and do a minus 6 on both sides. Okay. And we now have b squared plus 13b plus 20 equal 4b. And of course we could have gone ahead and minus the 4b as well. I'll do that right now. Again, we could have done it first, but it doesn't really matter. The whole point is we got to get rid of both the 6 and the 4b. So now our final improved equation looks like this. B squared plus 9b plus 20 equals 0. Now that it equals 0, I should be able to factor that. Now if I can't factor that, then I will use quadratic formula. But I think I can factor that. Let's see. B times b is b squared, right? 4 times 5 is 20. Can I get a plus 9 with a 4 and a 5? If I do plus 4 plus 5, don't I get 9b? And so yes, I have it factored. Wasn't that pretty easy? And now, what plus 4 makes it 0? That's negative 4. What plus 5 makes it 0? Negative 5. So I now know that b equals negative 4 or negative 5. And these are what we call our roots, or sometimes referred to as our zeros. I believe I'm spelling that correctly. Or x-intercepts. And all three of those words mean the same thing. In other words, I know that negative 4 and negative 5, if I plug it back in, will give me 0. Okay, now notice this problem here is a little different than the previous problem. And what I mean by that is, notice in here, there is no n term. We have a quadratic n squared there, right? But there is no n with it. So we could solve it, try to factor, use quadratic formula, but what I want you to try to remember is that if there is no n in this case, then what I'm really basically going to do is minus 9 both sides. Okay, that gives me 9n squared equal to 486. And then I can just solve it straight up. I can go ahead and divide by 9. And see how I have n squared all by itself equal to 54. And since n squared equals 54, well, let's just square root n squared. And hopefully we know a square root is the inverse of squaring. So therefore, all I'm left with is n equal to the square root of 54. And And the square root of 54 is 7.3484. So rounding it off, how about if we just say 7.35? Okay, now I almost made one critical mistake, however. Please remember, now that we're in the upper levels of mathematics, the answer is not just 7.35, but also negative 7.35. Whenever we do a square root, in other words, we end up with a plus or minus, a positive and a negative answer, okay? And so that concludes this little video on solving quadratics.